watching Canadian Muslim news on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Today, a conversation with an author for his new book called Minarets on the Horizon about Muslim pioneers in Canada, Dr. Murray Hogben. First, some news headlines. First woman of Indian heritage is elected as mayor in Calgary. A new book to educate kids about Islamic History Month in Canada. Scotiabank donates $250,000 for refugees in Afghanistan. Muslim lawyer sues New Jersey State Bar Association over board diversity. And China is using a sophisticated system to restrict Uyghur lives. And now some details. Jyoti Gondek has been elected as mayor of Calgary. The 52-year-old woman is the first woman to be elected to Calgary's municipal office as mayor. Jyoti was among the 27 mayoral candidates, which was narrowed down to 5 a few weeks before the election. She celebrated her win surrounded by friends and family. Jyoti was born in the United Kingdom to an Indian family. At a young age, she moved to Canada. She settled in Manitoba and worked in a marketing consultant firm. Though election results will not be formally announced until October 22nd, Jyoti is ecstatic to begin her term as mayor. Nosheen Ahmed, a mother of 4 in London, Ontario, has committed to creating guidebooks on Islam. Ahmed is a member of the Equity and Inclusion Education team in the Thames Valley District School Board in London, Ontario. She is creating the books in light of Islamic Heritage Month in Canada. The book will educate readers on Islam and the importance of Islamic Heritage Month. It will do so by covering Muslim contributions toward modern-day products, including cars, coffee, and much more. Scotiabank will donate $250,000 to the Veterans Transition Network. The Veterans Transition Network consists of Canadian veterans who have been leading the effort to relocate Afghans to Canada. Bob Berube, the Vice President of Operations at Scotiabank, is a retired lieutenant colonel from the Canadian Armed Forces who served in Afghanistan. He says that the donation will provide housing and food for Afghan families and keep them safe while they await transport to Canada. Scotiabank's action follows their previous donation to the Afghan Women's Organization back in July. Scotiabank had given $500,000 in donations to the organization to aid in resettling and integrating Afghans into Canada. A Muslim lawyer from New Jersey is suing the State Bar Association for discrimination. This is because of a policy aimed at fostering diversity on its board of trustees. Rajesh Sade, who heads a 6-person law firm in Bridgewater, says the association reserves 8 of the 49 trustee seats for members of certain underrepresented groups. Sade says that practice is discriminatory because he is not a member of those groups. A former association trustee, Sade is also critical of the group's decision not to add Muslims to the list of underrepresented groups. According to a report by the Australian Policy Strategic Institute, authorities in Xinjiang are using the community and grassroots organizations as a surveillance method. These groups surveil Uyghurs living in the area to gather micro-clues to report to the police. These clues, such as an unexpected phone call or visit, would be used as evidence for further investigation into the Uyghur. The report also found a likening of the re-education policies undertaken by Xinjiang officials to that of the Mao Zedong era. China's embassy responded to the report by denying all claims. According to The Guardian, the embassy labeled the institution that released the report as an anti-China rumor maker. That's it for the news. And now a conversation with Murray Hogben about his new book, Minarets on the Horizon. Welcome to the show, Dr. Murray Hogben. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Now we're here to talk about your new book. I have my copy here all full of bookmarks and things.
Good.
We'd like to ask you, actually, there aren't very many books about Muslim history in Canada. Can you tell us why you decided to write this book?
Well, back in 1979, there were a lot of books coming out across the country on, the Poles in Canada, the Greeks in Canada, and the Lithuanians. So I was working with, or connected with, a thing called the Council of Muslim Communities of Canada, and we decided it would be a good idea to have a book on the Muslims in Canada, as opposed to an ethnic group, but kind of a multi-ethnic group across the way. And so I got a small grant from the federal government and did some traveling in Western provinces and a bit in the Maritimes to interview people for a proposed book on the kind of social economic situation of Muslims in Canada, circa 1980.
What did you learn when you were doing those traveling and those interviews?
Well, I'd learned about the diversity and the interest and of that community of all sorts of nationalities, ethnicities, and degrees of history. But in working on the book later, then I learned a lot more, because all the files on the computer and everything all got burnt up in 2011, and then I had to start again once some stuff was retrieved from cyberspace. And I thought, this is going to be a history rather than a kind of a study of the Muslim community back then. This is going to be, or could be, a history of these kind of earlier, what I'm calling pioneer Muslims.
That was such a traumatic experience that your family went through with that fire. I'm so sorry about that.
Thank you.
You're saying that led you to change the way you approach the book. Could you just elaborate a little bit?
Well, that what I had done then was, as I interviewed all these people in different cities, because Muslims tend to be in urban settings. And I would ask them about their life and times and so on, and, about the local communities or mosques, whatever. And I've visited with various Muslims across the Western provinces in particular. And of course, living in Toronto in those days, back in 79, then I interviewed a lot of people in that area. But once everything was gone, then I found that what had actually survived in cyberspace that my son-in-law was able to retrieve led me in a different direction. I thought, this is going to be a history rather than a kind of a social economic study, and try to get back to these people and their backgrounds, because a lot of them had family in Canada for maybe, since maybe 1900. So I got a different kind of book. And then I went to elaborate and then stretch it across the country by further interviews.
What do we know then about those early Muslims?
Well, what I learned is their tremendous hard work, resilience, bravery. Some of them kind of arrived age 12 with an uncle or something, and then went up to the far north to, either pedaling along the road with a pack full of things a pack full of goods to farm families. There were no Sears catalogs, and there were no, means, UPSs or whatever, and there were no delivery. People didn't get to town, so you brought a variety of goods, buttons and bows and materials and shoes and God knows what all, to the farmer, and they would say, yeah, we'll have that, and come and stay the night, or in some cases, get away from here, and if you come back, I'll shoot you. So these early Lebanese Syrian peddlers with limited amount of English were very hard working. Some of them went into farming, again, out west in particular, or worked in a mine, but basically they were mercantile people who went into business, whatever they could. When they could get enough money from peddling with a heavy pack on their back, then they might buy a horse and cart. And once they'd gone from there, then they might settle down, get a store, and maybe bring a bride over from overseas in Lebanon, or Syria, Lebanon as it was.
So the early immigrants that you documented in your book are Syrian Lebanese. Most of us think about Muslims not arriving till the early 70s.
Yes, well, most Muslims in Canada arrived, as you say, after, and as I'm saying, my kind of pioneer parameter is after 67. In 67, they brought in the point system, which said, what skills do you have, what language do you have, etc. What can you do from the country rather than the previously racially based one, which said we're going to let in 150 Indians a year and 100 Pakistanis and 50 Sinhalese, etc. It was a really racially based policy before that. But after 67, then the numbers started to shoot up. And since the 1950s, increasingly, a number of Indian graduate students or Pakistani graduate students began to add to the mix of this rather early, what I might call Ottoman people, either the Syrian Lebanese or the Albanians. And there were a lot of Albanians in Toronto when we first moved there in 58, 59.
And what was the relationships like between the earlier Lebanese Syrian Muslim communities and those arriving from South Asia?
Well, they had different backgrounds and different expectations and different experience from where they came from. So you were mixing a kind of, initially undereducated group from the Balkans or the Mediterranean with the usually well-educated Indo-Pakistanis who arrived later. And so there are certain differences about how they got along. In some cases, they got along fine, but otherwise they often eventually end up kind of splitting off, and people tend to socialize and even go to Islamic centers or build mosques with similar people. But they are a mixture. I mean, the Muslims in any mosque are all sorts of nationalities.
Do you have a favorite story you could share from your book?
Well, one of my favorite people was a woman by the name of Hilwi Hamdan, who came out in 1923 at age 17 with her husband, Ali Hamdan, who had a trading post up at Fort Chipewyan in northern Alberta. I mean, the tremendous hardship. I mean, they had to kind of move around by dog sled in winter. And here was this isolated woman with a couple of Catholic missionaries and maybe an RCMP officer, basically in the far north, dealing with trading with the indigenous population. And she survived. And when they moved down to Edmonton, because she had 6 children by this time, she pushed and worked and encouraged this handful of Syrian Lebanese in Edmonton. I mean, she said once there were 22 of them. But they got to a meeting and she said, I'm anxious to hear the word of God and we must build a mosque. And everybody said, no, it can't be done. But she said, no, if God wants it done, he will get it done. And he will help us. And she then went across the country raising money from all sorts of scattered store owners and traders and so on, and convinced the mayor of Edmonton to give them a free plot of land. And they built the Al Rashid Mosque in 1938.
Most people don't think of Muslim women as being that involved, especially in building of a mosque.
Yeah, but that's true. I mean, she was pretty unique. But there were a lot of other women who tended to be the people who backed up and helped their husbands, push for these things. I mean, they would provide the food. They would allow, organize so they could have a social event, people who gather and raise funds or whatever, or pass on what they knew about religion. The earlier people didn't know a lot about it because simply they were simple people from villages in Lebanon in particular, or in Albania. The later people then, the kind of well-educated people who came from Indo-Pakistani, then had a lot more religious background and knowledge and schooling, for better or for worse. So yeah, there's a difference between these sets of people, but the women did remarkable things. I wish I had interviewed more of them, but I have some in the book, and they're remarkable people.
Now, you mentioned that sometimes the peddlers would be met with the gun, don't stay on our property. Do you think there are any overlaps between today's anti-Muslim racism and what they faced in those early 1900s?
It's, I mean, in simple terms, Muslims and the kind of Christian West haven't got along since the Crusades, in effect. But it depends on personal relationships. Sometimes people had very good experiences. One of our people that I interviewed in the book said that when they were looking for, or they were being offered some church stuff in rooms in a church for their gatherings, and the minister said, well, I understand you people don't like pictures and things like that, and so we can cover over the crosses and the pictures of religious Christian pictures, so to make you comfortable. Remarkable. I mean, he said, that was Islamophobia. That's pretty good. And then, but other people, like this little kid, Salim Ghanem, when he was a boy out west, the teacher asked where he came from, and he said, what his name was. It was Salim. What's your nationality? He said, Syrian. And they said, what's your religion? And he said, Mohammedan, which is all he knew back during the First World War time. And she took her hand and said, Turk. And all the kids fled around him. But other people had good experiences. Some of them had great times. Some of them had bad times. So Islamophobia has always existed there, but it's also people got along, and they had to get along if you're going to be in business and so on. So it's a varied kind of picture.
I guess that's similar today. We have allies and we have the haters.
Yep.
So we have to leave it there. I love talking to you about history in your book. I encourage everyone to go out and get their copy. Thank you very much for joining us today on the show.
Great pleasure. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Salam. So that's it from us. You've been watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay safe and God bless.